Well, for our next edition of Behind the Breeding Barn, it's time to head back across to North America and catch up with the trainer of one of the newbies to this year's stallion roster, Cannibal, that being Nancy Takter, to find out much more about him, the horse that he was, and of course get the insight as to what we can expect when his progeny start to hit the ground here in the Southern Hemisphere. Thanks for your time, Nance. I'm sure that you loved talking about this boy. He was a real stable favourite, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was an absolute gem. I think everybody was really sad to see him leave the barn when he went off to stallion duties.
In terms of the horse that he was, I want to talk about that shortly, but just on how he came into the barn, you've obviously got a great relationship with Diamond Creek and you've had a lot of success with their progeny in the past. So was he one of a few that came through? Did you get to pick out? How did that all happen?
So usually Diamond Creek sends me a handful of yearlings every year. They kind of decide which ones go to which trainers. Primarily, myself and Brett Pelling train most of their babies. So he came in the C group because they were all named with a C that year, and he stood out right away as one of the nicer ones in the group for sure.
Do you remember him early on? I know you have a lot of horses to work through each and every year, but I'm sure there's a few that stand out each season.
Yeah, he was really easy to work with, very easygoing. We break all our own babies on the farm. So he, never gave us any problems. I always say he was like my A+ student from day one, always eager to show up and do his work every day, and just a pleasing horse really to be around.
What about his 2-year-old year? Because he raced quite a few times at 2. 3 is when he really stepped up. But as a 2-year-old, and we're always looking for that early speed, did he show it?
Yeah, he did actually show a lot of early speed. He was actually scheduled to baby race pretty early in his 2-year-old year, and then he actually popped a splint and it was killing him. And, we gave him some time off for that to kind of set. And then he missed a little bit time because of that. And I took him to the Red Mile to qualify him because he was Kentucky eligible. Brought him down to the Red Mile, and I was kind of like, all right, well, we've trained him enough. Let's just throw him in a qualifier and see how he does. And he actually ended up winning that qualifier and was super impressive. And he went on to, win his final for that year in Kentucky and had a really nice 2-year-old season. We never raced him in any of the really major big stakes at 2. He did race in the Breeders' Crown. But he was just maybe a little bit immature too. And like I said, he did miss a little bit in the beginning of the season when we gave him a little bit of time. So I put him away after his 2-year-old season, knowing that he was going to be fresh and ready for his 3-year-old year.
We spoke to Adam Bowden a little while ago about he and Confederate, and he mentioned the fact, I'm pretty sure, that there was some discussions around gelding him at that point. He was hard against that transpiring, and it was clearly the right decision at the time because then he went on as a 3-year-old to do great things. But just on that decision, I know you have a lot of colts in the barn, majority colts. So when, as a trainer, do you have to make that call?
I usually don't like to make that call. I'm not a very big fan of gelding horses, so if I can avoid doing it, I usually don't. Maybe every year we geld 3 or 4 out of a group of 45 babies. So I don't really think that I ever saw a reason to geld him. I thought, he was just a little bit immature. And like I said, his behavior and his willingness to do his work was never a problem. So I don't really see that there was ever going to be any advantage to gelding him at all.
Training him back as a 3-year-old, did you see the signs that you wanted to see of maturity from 2 to 3?
Yeah, he filled out a lot between his 2 and 3-year-old year. And, he put on a little bit of weight and he grew quite a bit between his 2 and 3-year-old season. And he had a really good winter training on the straight track. We do a lot of heavy work on the sand between the horses' 2 and 3-year-old season, and he just handled that work greatly.
In terms of his 3-year-old year, we won't touch on every bit and piece that happened, but he was so consistent. That's what I loved about him at 3. He turned up in every big fight and he was never too far away. What was your favourite piece of his 3-year-old season? It mightn't have even been a win. It might have just been, just a great performance.
I think probably when Adios was exciting because it was my first Adios, and that's a very classic race. I guess the purse isn't really huge or anything to brag about, but it's an historic race that means a lot in American harness racing. And he raced against some really nice horses in that race, and he he performed beautifully. He raced good in his elimination, and then he was just super in the final.
Down here, we get to see these horses' racetrack performances, but we generally don't get to learn a lot about them. That's a great part of this series. So just on him, and we've already touched on his attitude and his willingness to work and his ease around the barn, and that's something we all want from progeny going forward. Just touch on that a little bit more. I guess the horse Cannibal, not necessarily the performances that he put forward.
Yeah, like I said, he was always very eager to please. He was our A+ student. I don't think he ever missed a meal in the 2 years that I trained him. Always very eager to go to the feed tub, eager to go to work every day. But he also took really good care of himself. He would relax when it was time to relax. Never did anything stupid to expend a bunch of energy before races. Very chill in the paddock or, the race paddock before his races. And I really just can't. He was, if I could have a barn full of horses like him, my life would be a lot easier for sure.
Sweet Lou throws them in different shapes and sizes, and there's probably not a, set recipe for his progeny. But what type of style of horse was he?
I think he was more of a strong horse. He had, really good lung capacity and really good gaited, and he could get himself into, he could leave or he could be taken aback, and he was very handy. I actually think compared to maybe a lot of other Sweet Lou's, he was actually a little bit more handy than what they tend to be. Sometimes they're a little bit up in the bridle and a little bit too willing to go, where he was just kind of the type of horse where when, Yannick started driving him, Yannick could put him in any position that he needed to put him in, which is, one of the reasons why he did end up winning the Adios was because Yannick was able to give him such a beautiful drive in that race.
He's obviously a beautifully gaited horse. He won an elimination of a Meadowlands Pace, if my memory serves me correctly, but then he raced so well in a Little Brown Jug series as well. And that's important for our breeding down here because we don't have a lot of huge tracks. Horses getting around these tighter turning circuits is something that we really look to it, and that was a key asset of his.
Yeah, he was great gaited. He didn't wear a lot of equipment. The Adios is raced on a 1,000-meter track, and he was really good at the jug. Unfortunately, the final heat didn't really turn out the way we wanted, him getting parked the entire mile. But, he showed his resilience in that race too, because even though he got such a tough trip in the jug final, I did end up racing him back, just a short time after in the red mile. And I think maybe people thought I was a little crazy to race him back so quickly in the bluegrass. And he ended up winning that race, and he came back the week after and won the Tattersall's Pace. So, he just kind of shrugged off that performance and kind of went forward.
For those who are wanting to breed to him this year, we've obviously touched on many key points, but he was part of a really strong group, wasn't he? And Confederate obviously was the divisional champion that year, and he's come down with Cannibal together to stand at Cobbitty, but he's standing at $5,000 here in Australia, which is a really entry-level price for a horse of not only his ability and what he did on the racetrack, but his breeding that some may not know a lot about. He's impeccably well bred.
Yeah, he's a really nice, well-bred horse. And like you touched upon, it was a really tough group of horses that year that he raced. It's who came from that crop too, who's still racing really well. And, I think at 5,000, he's a bargain, and I would definitely breed to him for that.
You've watched probably more Australian and New Zealand races in the last few years, particularly with so many of your stallions coming down here than you would have before. He just looks a perfect horse to me for our racing. You mentioned his great attitude, his willingness to please, and the fact that he gets around smaller tracks. We clearly race over further than a mile as well, and he's just so tough and nuggety. I can only imagine that he's just going to suit, particularly our mares as well, a lot of those Bettor's Delight mares really well.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And like I said, he's just so handy, and he had early gate speed, and you could still take him back and, slow him down where, maybe in a distance race, you want to kind of get your good position, but then, be able to get your horse back and kind of get them to relax through the mile. And he was able to do that so beautifully. He was a beautiful horse to drive.
This is another in a very long list of stallions that you've made as part of your stable. You must be really proud. We know there's several here standing in the Southern Hemisphere now. I'm sure pride is something that you feel each and every year, as much as it's sad to see them go to the breeding barn.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a trainer, sometimes I wish I could race them another year, but I have to be really proud of myself and my staff. You know, we've done a good job. You know, last year we brought two horses to be stallions, and then this year we're having another three. So, you know, if we could continue to do that, we've done our job long term and making a big mark on the sport in the long run too.
Well, we'll watch with interest for next season. Who knows? There might be another that comes down to join these boys here as part of the breeding program. Really appreciate your time, Nancy. Thank you for your insight as well. And we can't wait to see what Cannibal can do as a sire.
Thank you.